This is the factory speaker and speaker pod out of the new Wrangler JL and Gladiator JT vehicles. As you can imagine, when upgrading the car audio system in this vehicle, going from this speaker size to this speaker size definitely has some benefits. To do so, we replaced the stock speaker pod with one of these aftermarket ones. But unfortunately, to make this swap requires the removal of a good portion of the dash of the vehicle. I've seen pictures of all these panels removed, and to be honest, I feel like it can be kind of intimidating. So the question is it really that big a job, and what potential issues might come up throughout? I'm Mark, welcome to Car Audio Fabrication, the show where together we learn how to master car audio and how to design, build, and install our dream car audio system. Let's get into removing these pods. In order to install our new speakers into the knee panel location, we need these aftermarket pods, but this is a complex install, so we also need good instructions, and that's where monthly channel sponsor Crutchfield comes in. Crutchfield has this document that they create for the different vehicles that they've researched, and it is called the Master Sheet. Now this one for the Wrangler JL or the Gladiator JT gives us installation instructions for several different parts of the install. The first nice feature of the master sheet is we can see exactly which tools are needed based on which install we are doing. That way we can prepare before we start taking things apart. There are also several detailed pictures that show exactly where we need to pry things apart and where different fasteners are, along with detailed instructions. To learn more and take advantage of a special offer for Car Audio Fabrication fans, check out the link here on screen or down in the video description. Let's get started with the process here of replacing those speakers. Now, I do currently have both seats removed. You don't have to do that for the speaker installation process. I'm doing that because I'm running wiring underneath the carpet to the amplifier locations. I'll have an amplifier underneath each seat on these JL Audio Stealth Box mounting racks here. Having all of that stuff out of the way will help for making wiring a lot easier. Let's get into this process. The first panel that needs to be removed is below the steering wheel, and this just has 4 different clips on that we can carefully pry away. Next, I pry away this panel that has all the climate control buttons and the volume control, and this has 2 different wiring harnesses on the back side that we just pinch the little connector and disconnect. Now, I have an aftermarket radio installed, but this should be the same for a factory radio. The radio trim bezel has 2 screws that I have to remove. Next is this lower trim bezel around the steering wheel. We don't completely remove this, but we're just going to push it out of the way so that we can access a couple of other screws. So far, all the screws are 7mm or Phillips head, and now I just need to remove this one as well. There are several screws hidden behind this access panel on the side of the dash, so I'm going to pry that off. So far, everything's been pretty easy. I now need to remove these screws here along this edge holding in this piece. And this one right here is complicated to get to. You can't get really at it with a normal screwdriver, so you will need to use an adjustable wrench. It's a 7mm if you have an open-ended wrench. The next complex part is removing this dash panel here. It snaps out this direction and it has several snaps on the backside. And the biggest tip I can give you is if you see where the snaps go in, they go in from this direction. I would avoid pulling upwards too much. You more want to pull this direction, pull out and away from the dash. Next, there are 4 screws above the gauge cluster to remove. This piece does have a couple of snaps on the backside, but otherwise easy to take out. I'm also going to take out the 4 screws on the other side, but we cannot remove this panel quite yet. Back to the driver's side, there's a nice little hidden bolt underneath right here, and then 2 bolts up top holding in the rest of this piece. When removing this panel, you have to disconnect the lighting wiring right here with this wire harness, and it gave me a little bit of difficulty. This red tab right here is normally in the down position when it's secured. You need to push that tab all the way in the up position, and then you can push in on this, and that releases that connector. We are making some progress here. Now on the driver's side of the vehicle, we have access to this speaker here. If you were just swapping out the speaker, you could obviously undo these holes, but you would be limited to using a speaker this size or smaller. In my case, we're going with that completely new pod, so we can do a 6 or 6.5 inch speaker. So let's get this stock pod removed. In order to actually get the pod out, we need to loosen up this metal bracket. We're not going to completely remove it because it has a lot of wire harnesses and other things attached to it. We just need to loosen these bolts in order to flex it out of the way. I can now finally disconnect the pod itself. There's a screw on the bottom, one on top, and then there's also a screw that comes in from the side. So we officially now have the stock speaker pod out of the vehicle. Now I will say so far this has definitely been the most complex part. You definitely have to apply a good amount of pressure to get the top tab past this part of the dash. You have to kind of just flex it up ever so slightly. It just barely needs to be pushed up, and it will allow clearance for you to then bring the pod down this direction. You'll disconnect the speaker wiring from the back side of the pod, and then also on the back is this module here. That module needs to be retained, so we remove those 3 screws, and there's going to be a mounting provision for it on the back side of our aftermarket pods. So that's one side down. Let's move over to the passenger side. I start with removing the glove box door by opening it and then pushing the tab down to release it. Next, I need to remove these 3 screws at the bottom of the glove box door. Got those removed. Now I need to remove the side panel, just like on the driver's side. This will give me access to these 4 screws, and just like the driver's side, again, I need an open-ended wrench to get to that bottom one. As it's tight in here, you can't get a normal screwdriver in. Next, we use our pry tool to remove this panel, and this gives us access to 2 10mm bolts that we can remove. Now that the grab bar is out of the way, we can carefully pry away this trim panel here. Once this trim panel is out of the way, there's 2 more screws to undo. Up inside the dash are 2 13mm bolts that we have to remove. In order to avoid completely removing this assembly, we've just loosened it enough that we can access 3 different screws. There's 1 here, 1 behind here, and 1 behind here. Now, it's almost impossible to capture the next step on video, but with all those different screws removed, you can now flex this out of the way enough that you can get a screwdriver in there and undo the 3 different screws that are on the stock speaker pod holding it in, and we can pull it out. You would think it would be more difficult to remove this pod on this side since you can't completely take out this cover, but that's actually not true. There's really nothing below the pod, so once you do disconnect the 3 different screws, one coming in from the side here through this whole pod just drops down. Now that I've got the stock pods removed, a couple of takeaways for you guys. First of all, this is definitely doable for the average do-it-yourselfer as long as you have some basic tools. With that said, this is definitely more of a labor-intensive project. Here's all the panels that had to come out, along with all of the fasteners, quite a few. So I would definitely recommend that if you're planning on doing this project, you're going to want to make this a weekend project. I wouldn't do it if you have to use the vehicle the next day. Now, the new pods are designed to be bolt-in, so we could simply add our new speaker, wire everything up, and bolt these bad boys in, but I do want to make some modifications to these. Nothing against the design of these. At $60, I think these are a great value, but there's definitely some things that I just want to do to make sure that I get optimal performance here. The first of which being, I want to add some sound treatment to the inside and outside of these. And since these are designed to be universal and have some holes for some of the larger speakers that I won't be using, I want to make sure that I get those all sealed up. I have a couple of other things I also want to do to prep them for the new aftermarket speaker, so we're going to be covering that in a separate video. If you're new to the channel, I have several things that I'm doing in this system to upgrade the Wrangler. We're doing 2 different amplifiers, multiple subwoofers, a full 3-way component speaker system up front. If you guys want to catch those videos, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. Don't forget that the installation process can be made a lot more simple with a master sheet from show sponsor Crutchfield. To see if there's one available for your vehicle and to take advantage of a special offer for CarAudioFabrication fans, you can check out the link here on screen or down in the video description. A big thanks to them, along with Bryson, Mike, Ali, Jerry, Marcos, William, and the rest of the Patreon membership team. A big thanks to all those guys for making these videos possible, and thank you for watching.